church, and I'm both a demonologist and an exorcist, and I've been studying the subject of demons and demonic possession for some years now. So I first began to study demons, there we go, after I had an incubus attack. It was December 1999. I was 27 years old, and I woke up having had a nightmare. I was very scared the moment I opened my eyes, and the room was a very strange shade of blue. I turned on my side to try to waken my partner, but I couldn't. This is a feature of these incubus attacks. And just then I was thrown onto my back and pinned down, completely paralysed. And above me was a male entity with long black hair, chalk white face, and dark eyes, very leering sort of look, much the same as these two pictures here. There was also an old woman, and she was standing in a corner, long white dress, long white hair, and she was laughing and covering her mouth and stifling her amusement. The demonic entity above me, the incubus, leered menacingly towards me and said, "You thought you could get away from me, didn't you?" And he had one very long fingernail which he started trying to cut my throat with. Obviously I was terrified. I've been watching Ash versus the Evil Dead, which is very funny, I have to say. The character of Baal appeared, and he had one very long, sharp fingernail. So that brought back some spooky memories there. And I wondered if this was perhaps a feature of this demon. So I'll need to look out for that, because I don't know why that particular feature was used. Anyway, I tried to scream out, but I couldn't, and I tried to force my head further back into the pillow because that was all I could do. I passed out at some point and woke later in the morning. Everything was back to normal. About a week later, I woke up paralysed again. The room was a strange shade of blue like before, but this time I did manage to scream out, and my partner, who was in the next room this time, came through and turned on the light, and that stopped the experience. About a year later, I saw this imp-like creature. He was on the outside of the window. Now, I was on the 15th floor of a high-rise that I was living in at that time. And this creature was looking around the room, but he didn't seem to be able to see me. About the same time, I was passing a neighbour's house. The door was wide open. The window I could see was wide open, and the curtains were blowing about. And I could hear this guttural. To me, it sounded non-human. A guttural voice. It sounded like something out The Exorcist. And it was screeching and calling her all sorts of names, lots of curses and swearing and bad language. And I voiced concerns to the concierge in the building, and they said that they were aware of the situation and had contacted social services. And a week later, the young woman was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. 15 years later, November 2014, I was introduced to James Welsh at the Stirling Paranormal Festival, and he was talking to me about the UFO sightings that he'd had in December 1993 over Glasgow. And on the train home one night, he produced a photograph, and he explained that the photograph, he'd photoshopped the UFO to show what one of them looked like and where he saw it. And when he passed it over to me, I was astonished to see that where he had seen this in the same month as I had experienced my attack was in fact right above my flat in Tory Glen. Now, I've got no dates written down, except knowing that it was the same month, but I do think, it's my opinion, it's only my opinion, that it's highly likely to have been related in some way to this incubus attack. And if that is the case, then someone completely independently possibly witnessed something of a different phenomenon than the one that I had assumed, because I'd suspected it to be demonic, and here was a UFO, even possibly alien, although one doesn't necessarily mean the other. Historically, one of the reasons that these night demons appear is sexual, but another reason is murderous intent, such as the one that I experienced. And this phenomenon goes back a really long way. Oops, go back. In the epic poem Gilgamesh, and that's considered to be the first great work of literature. It dates back to 2100 BC. Lilu, the masculine, and Lilitu, the feminine, are both mentioned in there. And both these characters function as incubus succubus demons, and they were thought to bring disease, illness, and death, appearing to men and women, abusing men and women in their sleep. The most important of these kind is Lilith. She has a whole mythology associated with her. She was Adam's first wife, and that root word Lil has other relevant things associated with it. It was the Sumerian wind demon, and Lila is the Hebrew for night. Lilith is the Hebrew name of the screech owl. So the word conjures up the idea of demons and nighttime and such things. So the incubus succubus attack, or also known as the old hag syndrome, involves various supernatural characters. Usually one or more of the following is present in this experience. You've got the incubus here, the young adult male demon. You've got the succubus, young female demon, the old hag, and the small goblin imp type creature. Now, a couple of words that have been handed down to us from the ancient Greeks. First of all, the word demon comes from the term daemon. I know you probably know all of this, but this didn't necessarily have a negative connotation as it later became. Hesiod talks about two kinds of demons. We've got the daemons of the hero cult, and they acted as guardian spirits. And then the other ones he described as being evil spirits that caused harm. Just go back to that. He described these evil spirits as causing harm. In classical mythology, good daemons were benevolent spirit guides, even viewed as God, or certainly similar to a god. In Plato's Symposium, they were explained as neither god nor mortal, but something in between. And their function is to pass the message between God and humans, or a god and a human. Pythagoras believed that the air was full of souls called daemons, and heroes who sent dreams, signs, and illness. This photo actually shows Socrates, who famously had a daemon guardian spirit who would give him advice. The ancient Egyptians related the existence of malevolent demons to evil, the realm of chaos outside the created world. And sometimes they're controlled by major deities such as Ra and Osiris. The demons can be agents of punishment, like the messengers, which are mentioned in magical and ritual texts from the Middle Kingdom through the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. And in other cases, these beings can cause misfortune without orders from the gods, making them themselves agents of chaos. So early cultures in general, including the ancient Greeks and Egyptians, certainly were aware of these malevolent beings too. And where there is evil shenanigans, there are going to be priests, shamans, or other spiritual leaders in whatever part of the world and in whichever time period that are called to deal with it. So at that point, magic came along. The evil beings, sometimes known as wanderers by the ancient Egyptians, could then be warded off and kept at bay, away from the human victims. So these wandering demons were also thought to be the cause of diseases, and as such they're mentioned in magical medical texts of the Middle Kingdom. Occasionally, ancient spells allude to their evil glance and warn them to turn their face backwards. So these wandering demons could enter and haunt houses as well as possess people. In the papyrus Chester Beatty 8, a magical spell from the New Kingdom, so the New Kingdom I've mentioned a few times now, and it was the 16th to the 11th century BC, and it lists part of the home to be defended against malevolent influences. Now, guardian spirits in ancient Egypt are also considered to be demons or daemons. Their function can be benevolent, provided you know their names and you know how to face them. So this is something that's come down over the years, is that you have to know the demon's name to deal with it. So by knowing these things, you can overcome their aggression. And this is an idea, as I say, that has survived down the years. Catholic priests famously need to know the demon's name before it can be cast out. Just going to say about the word magic. It comes from the term magi. They were the Zoroastrian priests from Persia. The Old Persian term magu is derived from the Proto-Indo-European mag, which means be able. So to give you an idea of how long exorcism has existed as a practice, we go back to ancient Mesopotamia. Exorcistic tradition in Mesopotamia goes back to the early dynastic period. It's hard to give an actual date, but we have tablets from around 2900 to 2600 BC. So the practice is likely to predate that by some time, possibly about 5000 BC, but it's impossible to know. It would have been transferred at some point through oral tradition. To put that into perspective, exorcisms have been around since before the pyramids were even in Egypt. Assyrian tablets reference the use of incantations and prayers to the gods, even challenging these demons. This talisman is used to ward off the evil and exorcise the sick. And the cylinder is depicting an exorcism, and both of these are from ancient Assyria, and both can be found in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Moving on to India, the idea of possession and exorcism also existed here from ancient times. This is the Mehandipur Balaji temple in India. It's believed to be the only temple in India where exorcism takes place. The holy books of the Hindus, the Vedas, were composed between 1500 and 1000 BC. And this is the Samhita layer of the text, which likely represents a developing 2nd millennium BC tradition of magical religious rites to address superstitious anxiety, spells to remove maladies believed to be caused by demons. Other holy texts from India, the Garuda Purana and the Agni Purana, also deal with exorcism, but these come a bit later, between 500 to 1000 AD. I think most, if not all, Christian churches believe in the existence of evil supernatural beings, and they use healing and deliverance prayers as well as exorcism rituals to rid victims of their influence. Now, I was brought, because I'm going to primarily concentrate on the Christian side of things here. I was brought up Church of Scotland, and demons were never mentioned. Not Church of Scotland now, but their stance is that they do believe in evil supernatural beings and possession, and they do carry out deliverance ministry on occasion. This was news to me because I'd never heard this. It was news to my mother as well. She didn't know that either. In 2002, Francis McNutt, a former priest, author of Deliverance from Evil Spirits, was invited by the Church of Scotland to hold a weekend seminar on deliverance, and 400 people came to a healing service at St Cuthbert's Parish Church just below Edinburgh Castle. The following year, deliverance ministry was set up by the Church of Scotland to help people who believed that they were possessed by demons. The same year, it was revealed that 2/3 of Church of Scotland ministers believed supernatural forces of evil exist today. I emailed the Church of Scotland for an update because that was from 2002, 2004. Actually, I think the paper was brought out in 2004. But I emailed for an update, and I spoke with a Ms. N. Mayer, which you couldn't make up. I thought that was quite hilarious. And I was told that their stance had not changed. The Church of Scotland in general believes in the existence of evil supernatural forces. So I'm currently investigating that. I find that quite interesting. The ritual Romanum is used in Catholicism. It's performed in The Exorcist. I've also got my very beautiful own copy of it there. That's my pride and joy. It's a very powerful tool employed by the Roman Catholic Church and the non-Catholic priesthood to help those who believe that they are possessed. And it calls on the most powerful and sacred symbols of the Church: the Virgin Mary, the saints, the archangels and angels, and of course Jesus. Now, discernment is rather an important thing in exorcism. All other avenues should be exhausted, for example, psychiatry and other tests, and sometimes a period of observation where the church usually encourages the person to attend church for a certain amount of time. They just want to observe what's happening with the person affected. Now, the priesthood has always been fairly cautious about the use of exorcism. You go back to the 17th century publication of the ritual, and it strongly cautions the priest against exorcism where no true possession exists. So in order to prevent a wrong diagnosis of demonic possession, these criteria have been developed which have to be met. You can see there speaking in esoteric languages, superhuman strength, etc. I'm sure you have heard of all these before, stigmata, levitation and whatnot. So the power of something like exorcism, these same words that have been used time and time again over centuries, are thought to have accumulated a positive power, a positive force against the evil demons, the powers of evil. Even more so if they're spoken in Latin, according to the Catholic Church, because it's considered a sacred language by them. So some traditionalists, like the late Father Amort here, Gabriel Amort, are very much against using, or were very much against using, translations other than Latin. On the subject of misdiagnosis, some possible misdiagnosis has led to some extremely tragic outcomes. I won't go into both their cases, but the belief that Michael Taylor was possessed may have acted like a hypnotic suggestion which caused him to murder his wife and dog. The Anglican Church are adamant that he was possessed, but he did go on to commit a very serious and tragic crime. Janet Moses was accidentally killed by her entire family because they believed that they were ridding her of a demon. It's a really disturbing documentary, sort of docu-film, as it were. You can find it on Netflix, The Exorcism of Janet Moses, if you have a stomach strong enough, because it really upset me watching that. And then we've got the famous case of Anneliese Michel. It's a famous case, often referred to as an example. I'm not going to go in too much about Anneliese because I'm sure you all know about her, but it's often referred to as an example of how mental illness can be mistaken for possession. But it's actually, when you look at it, it's a very complex case. It's an important and complex case. Anneliese's mother was an illegitimate child, and her mother had an illegitimate child, which she regarded as a grievous sin. And for that reason, she encouraged Anneliese to atone for the sins of illegitimacy through fervent devotion. So she came from this very religious background, and there was also in a film about her life, it's in German, her mother and her didn't get on too well. Her mother was quite dominant. Now, so she lived in this environment where she became increasingly anxious about many different things, and then she developed epilepsy, and she began to see and hear what she perceived to be demons telling her that she was damned. Today, doctors have likened her symptoms to schizophrenia, but they also say that she should have responded to treatment, but she didn't. Several sources have said that she predicted her own death and said that she would be free from demons before her death, and some sources, according to those present, said that she did die in a state of grace, free from demons, on the day that she said she would. But this could all be part of the mythology of Anneliese Michael. Was she demonically possessed? Well, she passed the Catholic checklist. As well as her aversion to holy relics and priests, she spoke in guttural voices. And I also found this quote in a newspaper from Anneliese's mother, who said that she had never regretted the exorcism. You can see the result of possession there, or what was perceived to be possession. Mother said, "I know that we did the right thing because I saw the sign of Christ in her hands. She was bearing stigmata, and that was a sign from God that we should exorcise the demons. She died to save other lost souls, to atone for their sins." So whether or not she was possessed is very much up for debate. Another famous case is that of Roland Doe. When William Peter Blatty was writing The Exorcist, he wrote to a priest, Father William Bodern. Bodern, he had heard, performed an exorcism in 1949, but the priest had been told by the Archbishop to keep that a secret, so he wouldn't divulge any information to Blatty for his book. But he did tell him that an assisting priest, Father Raymond J. Bishop, and sorry, I don't have a photograph of him, but he told him that Bishop had kept a diary, and a copy of that diary was obtained from Father Walter Halloran, and he also assisted at the exorcism. The diary identifies the possessed person as a child named only R. Sources identify him as Ronald Edwin Hunkeler, with other pseudonyms of Robbie Mannheim or John Hoffman. And he came from an evangelical background, an evangelical Lutheran family. His father and maternal grandmother had been baptised Catholics, but they weren't practising. And he had an aunt called, in various sources, Doris, Dorothy, Tilly, Harriet. So she often visited, and she was a spiritualist who introduced him to the Ouija board. And after his aunt's death, he began to play with this Ouija board himself. He spent hours on it. The family then experienced strange noises, furniture moving about of its own accord, and household objects flying or levitating when the boy was nearby. It all started on January the 15th, 1949, when his grandmother and his mother heard dripping and scratching noises in his bedroom, and a picture of Jesus began to shake. And this went on for 10 days. The family put it down to rats, but then the boy said that he could hear the scratching noises, but now no one else could hear them, just him. And the next thing to happen was that a noise was described as squeaking shoes, and these were only heard at night when he went to bed. I think they were heard downstairs by the family. There was an additional phenomena to this, with things being thrown or flying across the room, with Robbie's desk at school being moved about on the floor. That mirrors the very famous Socky poltergeist case, where the same thing happened. And at night, his mother and his grandmother, they both heard various odd sounds like marching, drumming, and more scratching noises. So the family first of all enlisted the help of their Lutheran pastor, Miles Schultz. He had an interest in parapsychology, and he wanted to observe Robbie in his home, and he wanted to observe him overnight to see what would happen. And after witnessing objects and furniture moving themselves, Schultz wasn't long in advising Robbie's parents to seek out a Catholic priest. Things worsened with Robbie thrashing about, shouting profanities, experiencing seizures, and urinating uncontrollably. First of all, Edward Hughes did an exorcism on Robbie, at Georgetown University Hospital, but he was injured in the process. And following that exorcism, Raymond J. Bishop and William S. Bodern were enlisted. And these two priests observed the bed shaking, objects flying across the room, and the boy speaking in guttural voices. He was also shown to have an aversion to sacred objects, as well as the priests themselves. Bodern was permitted then to perform a second exorcism. Walter Halloran and William Van Roo both assisted. Halloran said that during this exorcism, words such as evil and hell, as well as other marks, appeared on the teenager's body, and during the Litany of Saints, the boy's mattress began to shake. During the exorcism, Halloran's nose was broken, but eventually Roland was freed from whatever had possessed him, and he eventually went on to live a very normal, average, dull, some would say, life. You often find that people who are possessed, or even those who are being oppressed, where the demon is influencing but not yet possessing, often have mental health issues. That doesn't rule them out as being caused by an entity, or the entity might feed off the weakness of the victim, making them even more psychologically vulnerable. A case that I've been involved in recently has been one of more oppression, where the woman hears footsteps and bangs at night, and she's also heard an evil voice saying the name of Jesus in a very derogatory manner. And as you can imagine, many sleepless nights later, and the victim starts to feel depressed and anxious. But lately, myself and someone else have been encouraging this lady. I mean, we can't get to her just now. I have visited her once, and I did a blessing in her house, but not a full exorcism. But we've been encouraging this lady to start doing things that will make her feel empowered against this bothersome entity. And that's had quite positive impacts on her mentally. The noises have reduced considerably since last year. Now, myself and another friend encouraged her to make daily rituals of sprinkling holy water, saying the St. Michael's prayer against evil, and telling the entity in no uncertain terms to get out. It's very simple, but it works. But that is a case of oppression, and I think at that point you can perhaps help to empower the person, and perhaps when it's progressed to possession, as it sometimes does, someone has to carry out this ritual process. Anna Eklund is another famous case, and it's claimed that a successful exorcism was completed by Father Theophilus Reisinger in 1912. So this is quite an early case, but it is quite famous. And a film has been made, The Exorcism of Anna Eklund, which I didn't think was all that good, but there's something else for you to watch. Rumours spread that Anna's father and aunt, who was also her father's mistress, practiced witchcraft, and that they were cursing Anna. So another feature in possession cases is the belief of being cursed, or actually being cursed. So Anna said that she was possessed by Lucifer, Beelzebub, Judas, her father Jacob, and her aunt Mina, as well as other lesser demons. Now, it's a lengthy list, so you can have a little look at that. Inhuman strength that she possessed. So these were alleged paranormal phenomena that occurred during her 23-day long exorcism. Levitation, ventriloquism, huge amounts of solids and fluids which came from her body, vomiting tobacco leaves, speaking in languages that she didn't know, having psychic awareness of events, predictions that came true, unbearable smells, scratching noises, and then in Begone Satan, the author names these spirits as night prowlers, and he says that they're not unusual in cases of exorcism, and they can still cause disturbances long after the evil spirit has been driven out of the possessed person. We've got the testimony also of Teresa Wegener, Father Steiger's housekeeper, and she said, "I was a witness to the whole period of the exorcism of the Erling possession case, and I can truthfully say that the facts mentioned in Begone Satan are correct. Some of the scenes were even more frightful than described in the booklet. There's not the slightest doubt in my mind that the devils were present, and I will never forget the horrible scenes, vile, filthy, and dirty, as long as I live. All the nuns asked for a change and were transferred the next year." Thankfully, Anna was exorcised successfully in the end. Before I read Begone Satan, I had an encounter of my own, which matched with some of these events. Someone had come to fix my boiler, and when I opened the door, I got a really bad feeling about this man. I couldn't quite explain, but I just sensed something really negative from him. And after he was gone, there was still a presence in the house. Now, I lived on my own, so I was very aware of how the house felt to me. And after he had gone, it was like there was still somebody there. That night there were noises in the hall, clicks, and the noise of things falling, neither of which I could find a cause for. In the morning, when I opened the curtains, there was a very loud bang at the curtains with no discernible cause. And that day my kitchen flooded. So it was at that point that I addressed the entire room and I said, "This is my home. You can't stay here and you cannot attach yourself to me. Get out." A couple of weeks went by and then I was woken in the night with scratching sounds coming from the walls and the walls shaking. At some point also, an unholy smell appeared, the likes of which I have never experienced before. It was absolutely putrid and vile, and then within a short space of time, maybe I don't know, a minute or something like that, it was gone. After a couple of weeks went by, I was then woken up by an invisible force which was grabbing me by the wrists and trying to pin me to the bed. I managed to fight that off verbally, and that was the last straw. A few days later, I waited till I also have a background in paganism, and in paganism you use moon phases and festivals, solar festivals, to do certain types of magic. And I waited till the waning moon, so that's, as I say, important magically, because that's the time to do things, to take away things. So I waited till the waning moon. I did an exorcism. I banished all the negative spirits from my home, and then a short amount of time later, when I was sitting in my living room, I heard what sounded like 1,000,000 hailstones on the ceiling. It was like the sound of hailstones on glass. And my cats could hear it too, because they were looking up with their eyes bulging. And that sound lasted for about a minute, and then nothing more happened after that. Now, after the exorcism, the air in the room was, this is not my room, but it was lovely and fresh and clean. Spiritually, it wasn't anything to do with anything else that I had done, but the air was clear. My mother commented on it. She couldn't pinpoint what it was, but she said the atmosphere in the room's different. She didn't know about the exorcism that had been performed, but she certainly felt it. My mother's always been a little intuitive. She prefers to call it intuitive. I call it psychic. But she doesn't. She's not really into this subject, actually. So anyway, the next one is Brian Allen, and not everybody knows that they have a spirit attachment. Brian Allen details this in his book, I Cast Thee Out, and he describes an exorcism that was carried out on him. This was done by a colleague who had experience in esoteric matters. The man didn't call himself a priest or a shaman, but he'd certainly practiced enough to know what to do in the case of spirit attachments. And he told Brian that he had an attachment and that he could remove it. Brian agreed. I think more out of interest, because he didn't realise there was anything wrong, so he wanted to see what would happen. When the ritual began, the sound quality around Brian changed and the temperature lowered. The man began speaking in a language that Brian didn't recognise. He leapt forwards and then backwards, and Brian felt a tingling above his right shoulder blade. And his friend, he felt this tingling before his friend then put his hand on Brian's left shoulder, so the opposite shoulder from the one that was tingling. And he told him when he did that, the spirit has left you. And at that point, Brian's right leg gave way. He just felt this numbness in his sciatic nerve, and he dropped to the floor. Now, the only thing that makes me wonder about that case is the man putting his hand on Brian's shoulder, obviously, before Brian's legs gave way and he fell to the floor. Because I can't comment on any particular techniques that might have been used to cause that to happen. But, I mean, it certainly does sound like a few odd things happened that night. But as I say, I don't know. I would probably like to have more information on things that, for example, hypnotists. Now, I'm a hypnotherapist, but hypnotists are something different altogether. And it kind of sounded a little bit like something might else have happened there. But anyway, Dr. Richard Gallagher, he's a psychiatrist who teaches at Columbia University and New York Medical College. And he was once a non-believer, and he now says that demonic possession is real. He's seen the evidence. He's seen victims suddenly speaking in perfect Latin. He's seen sacred objects flying off shelves and people displaying hidden knowledge or secrets about other people that they couldn't possibly have known. And he says that's not psychiatry, that's beyond psychiatry. So for him, possession, although very rare, is also very real. And one of his cases involved a woman called Julia. She was heavily involved in satanic worship. I've got a cat meowing here, I'm sorry. Now, by satanic worship, I am assuming that dark magic is meant, and anyway, she had become possessed. It's something noted by many exorcists about victims, that it often does involve them having done some kind of magic that they weren't familiar with, or having used a Ouija board, which can have a very negative psychological impact on people. But objects would fly about around her. She knew personal details about Gallagher that she couldn't possibly have known. And one night when he was talking to Julia's priest on the phone, both of them heard one of Julia's demon voices coming through to them down the telephone wire. Now, Gallagher says that he knows quite a number of psychiatrists and other mental health professionals who believe in it too. There's Mark Albanese. He studied medicine at Cornell, and he's been practicing psychiatry for many years. He defends Gallagher's beliefs in possession, and he says that there is a growing belief amongst health professionals that the patient's beliefs should be taken into consideration when treatment is applied. So sometimes they do call upon exorcists to help with cases that they suspect to be demonic possession, and trans, I think it's trans possession is mentioned in that's actually not the word, but I can't remember the phrase, but it's listed now in the handbook, the psychiatrist's handbook, the DSM. Dissociative trance, that's it. Dissociative trance and possession disorder is a diagnosis in the DSM. Jeffrey Lieberman, a psychiatrist and director of the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He's a man who specialises in schizophrenia, and he's also had an unnerving experience with a patient. When he would go home at night after counselling sessions with this woman, the lights in his home would go off and on of their own accord. Photographs and artwork would fall off the shelves, and he would experience dreadful headaches. He mentioned this to a colleague, and she replied that she was having the exact same experience in her own home. Now, although he knows he can't verify its existence, Lieberman admits that he can't say demonic possession is impossible, and he can't rule it out as being a possibility. According to the Italian Association of Psychiatrists and Psychologists, the figures for those seeking exorcism in Italy was 500,000 each year. There were about 350 practicing exorcists worldwide at that point, and that was 2005. Exorcisms have increased in number, as have practicing exorcists. And the church, as you can see here, this is the annual exorcism course in Rome, which I would very much like to attend at some point. But that is the end of my talk, so if anyone has any questions, I'll try to answer them as best I can.
Thank you so much. That was there we go. That was absolutely fascinating. So let's stop the sharing of the screen for a moment. I don't know how to do that. Yep. Oh, no. I think you have to turn it off, Alyson.
I have to do it, okay.
And let's put you back up on full screen. Okay, try speaking and hopefully you'll appear.
Stop share. There it is. Right, okay. Sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.